I've been blessed so much. I said a little last Sunday, but I've been blessed so much by people in the church here, people in the community around us that we know, people that we've never met. It's been staggering. This morning, as I was just preparing in the office there, I opened a bit of correspondence, and there was a card that somebody had sent from Yorkshire. Doesn't know us, presumably got our address from somewhere or saw us on the BBC News last week or something like that. And this was a lovely little card for the community, and there was £5 in there as a donation towards the relief, you know. And I was kind of in tears there, because you're thinking, well, that it looks to me like that £5 has meant something to that person. And that's one of the things that we've seen the last 10 days. There are those who have plenty. There are those who have incredible resources, and yet it's been the ordinary people who have given, and the ordinary people who have come and been involved. And, you know, it wasn't that the same in Jesus' day? Isn't that always been the same? Jesus, even when he was preaching, was thinking of the needs of others. And we're going to read some verses. I'll start in John 6 from verse 1, and let me do it from I'll read it from the NLT, because that'll come up on screen easy enough as well. So John 6. Father, will you bless your word to us as we read it? Speak to us, Lord, through your word. Let your Holy Spirit challenge us, direct us, bless us, and encourage us, whatever is needed. That you are the God of all sufficiency. You can supply and meet all needs, not just ours, but through us, to touch and meet the needs of those around us. Amen. After this, Jesus crossed over to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. It was known as the Sea of Tiberias because the major city it was named Tiberias after the emperor was on there, so sometimes it was referred to as that. So if you see it in some versions as the Sea of Tiberias, you'll think, well, is that the same place? You'll know why it is. A huge crowd kept following him wherever he went, because they saw his miraculous signs as he healed the sick. Then Jesus climbed a hill, and a hill is a better translation than mountainside. It was more the hilly area. Then Jesus climbed a hill and sat down with his disciples around him. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. And turning to Philip, he asked, "Where can we buy bread to feed all these people?" He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. And Philip replied, "Well, even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money." Other translations even say if we worked for 8 months. Some will show the amount of denarii, that, you know, 1 denarii a day, how long it would take to feed them. Even if we worked for months, we still couldn't feed these people. Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Well, there's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that with this huge crowd?" "Tell everyone to sit down," Jesus said. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered about 5,000. And then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks to God, and distributed them to the people. Afterwards, he did the same with the fish, and they all ate as much as they wanted, and everyone was full. We'll leave it there for now. Yeah, while he was preaching, while he was sharing and teaching with them, he was thinking of the needs of the people, to eat and to rest. The Bible says that Jesus, was human as we are, and understood what it was to need rest, what it was to eat, what it was to get hot, what it was to be tired. He understood that. And in his humanity, although what he was saying to them was incredibly important, he also knew that they had need for food and for rest. Some years ago, Pauline and I were invited over to Kerala in south of India by a charity that we still support today as a church. We were asked to hold a leadership conference for workers of churches, youth workers, children's workers, pastors and teachers across churches there. So we said, okay, we'll come. And it was in the hill country, amongst a lot of the kind of poorer communities. And the organisers got workers from right across Kerala to come. And they came to this little town, which Pauline and I stayed in a hotel, if you can call it that, in the town. It was a bed anyway, which we were grateful for the night. The rest of the people came together, about 100 people, and they slept in the buildings, and they slept there for 3 days. And part of their need was not just to be there for teaching, which is what people that organised it wanted them, but they needed shelter, but they needed food. They needed to get there, so they didn't have the money, so we sent money out there so that they could all travel across to the centre and so that food could be provided them for them to eat. You know, practical needs go along with the teaching. The gospel isn't just, you know, knowing what Jesus said and what he did. The gospel has practical and social needs attached to it always, because people are people and they have those needs. It's very hard to talk to somebody if they're very hungry and if they're thirsty and if they're tired. And Jesus understood that. And so we provided funds for them to travel. Teaching they crave for, yet practical needs are still needed. And friends, we're no different. We're no different. We've come this morning to receive from God, but we've got practical needs as well that also need dealing with. The disciples, you'll know in this story, the future leaders of the church saw how inadequate they were. What can we do? There's 20,000 people and you're saying, like, you know, where can we get food? Come on. 5,000 men. People have estimated that probably means a good 20,000 people by the time you add the wives and the children and others who are there. Jesus, though, knew it was possible. The disciples saw it was impossible. Jesus knew it was possible. He knew what could be done. And so they're kind of looking around. Interestingly enough, this is the only miracle that we see in all 4 Gospels. John picks this one up. Must be some importance to that. And we're going to look at a few things I think that are important. And they said, well, look, there's a boy who's got some barley bread with him, some little rolls with him, and got some fish. John's the only one of the 4 writers who tells us that it was barley. The type of bread, he tells us, perhaps to emphasise that these were poor who came to Jesus. Barley is the food of the poor. We know in this country in medieval times that the heavy dark bread made from barley was staple food for the poor. Bread made from wheat and flour was the preserve of the richer, because wheat needs a really fertile, well-treated soil to grow well. So in Egypt, barley was used for animal feed. In Israel, it was the food of the masses, of the ordinary people. And so he comes along with this barley bread. And Jesus breaks it and blesses it, says, hey, this is enough. This boy's lunch is enough. Now, some people will try and tell you that, oh, actually, when this boy brought his lunch, everybody else thought, oh, yeah, we've got lunch and we've forgotten. Well, I know kind of human nature a little bit, and I'm going to tell you, if you've got 20,000 people and it's time to eat, more than one person is going to feel hungry. Yeah, I don't care how good the speaker is, and I don't care how amazing the program is. I know that people will, if they brought their lunch, if they brought their food, they'll be having it. There'll be enough of them. 19,999 people didn't just forget, oh, stupid, we brought food with us. No. So it wasn't that the boy brought it and then everybody else got their lunch out. That was all that was there. They hadn't planned to be there that long time. I suspect the boys had a very sensible mother who knew that he's always out longer than he says. What time are you coming back home? Yeah, I've heard that before. Gave him some lunch to be out and about. But he gets that and he brings it to Jesus. And Jesus uses it and he provides food. Just as God, through the great leader that they all look to, Moses, had provided manna daily in the wilderness as they travelled out of slavery from Egypt to the promised land. A journey that should have taken 40 days but took 40 years, that we know about. Just as God provided miraculous seeds, so here Jesus, one who's greater than Moses, is able to provide bread so that they were full up. Bread and fish that I can't eat anymore. In fact, they collected baskets full of it. Jesus, in John 6:35, John puts this story before he goes on to say how Jesus declared himself to be the bread of life. He is sent down from heaven to satisfy the hunger of mankind. Jesus, and only Jesus. Last week, when we saw this place full of food, it was amazing. It's amazing how people sent food and bottles of water enough to fill a van to meet people's needs, to meet the hunger. And yet, they will thirst again. That food will have gone, will have been consumed, and will need to be replenished. And Jesus came to feed the hungry so that they would be satisfied, so that they would never need to be hungry again. To satisfy the hunger of mankind. That's why Jesus came from heaven down to earth. The crowd, we know, responded to this miracle by trying to make Jesus king, and so he slips away because that really wasn't what it was about. So I've got a few thoughts, particularly based on what's happened during these 10 days. Grenfell Tower, on June the 14th, when the fire broke out, God took the little, and this is what God does. This is the miracle that God did. Jesus took that little and he broke it and he fed 20,000. In fact, he could have fed 40,000 or 50,000 or how many were there clearly. He made sure everybody's needs were satisfied. And on that fire, that morning, God took the little in terms of people and resources of the local churches. Latimer Christian Centre. Said last week, I've known the people there for 20 years. And what they're doing and what they did on that day, they've always done. They've always cared for people in the community. They've always opened their doors and their hearts and their wallets and everything to them. They've just never done it on that scale. The Methodist Church, I only met the Methodist minister once or twice before because he's only been in the community for 2 or 3 months. But I've met him a lot more during this last 10 days. And he, again, was just doing what's in his heart. Open the door. I know he couldn't even get into his building at first. The police, trying to keep people away, were keeping him away. If he was a bishop or somebody, he might have got there. But because he was just an ordinary vicar and they didn't know. But finally he got there and he got into his building to open it because it was right across the road. It's right across the road from it. Open it so people could come and be there so that they could provide a place of refuge, a place for help, a place for counselling. The Tabernacle church, which is just by the Westway, just the other side of the Westway. Again, they have feeding programs. Again, they do a lot in the community, just doing what they've always done, but on a bigger scale. Here at NHCC, saying to Danny, all we've done, and all I've seen others do, and I've said this to many of the leaders around, guys, it's great to see what you're doing, but you know what? You're doing what you've always done. This is your heart. This is what you're about. You're just doing it on a ridiculously big scale. When the BBC contacted me to come and film last Sunday, I said, well, we're only a small congregation, but you're welcome to come and to film. If you want some big sort of thing, go somewhere else. But actually what they were doing was catching the heart of it, and you've probably seen some articles this week that have picked up on there in The Guardian and elsewhere, that actually it was the local churches, the small so-called failed churches, because they're not full of hundreds of people and it's not all singing or dancing, everything that met the needs of the people. They were there, they opened the doors. In one of the richest, if not the richest, and most resource parts of one of the richest capitals on the planet, the authorities were nowhere to be seen, not visible. I know that some were working behind the scenes and there were things going on. National leaders were not able to do anything. Some of them were pretty much chased away when they did appear. But these churches and their small congregations opened the doors, opened their hearts, showed their compassion, and gave of themselves as they stood with the victims, saying, we haven't got the resources, but we know one that has. We can't meet your needs, but we know one that can meet your needs. The church can never outsource its mission to reach the lost. It must never outsource its mission to care for the poor and the needy. It can't say, well, we're just going to stand on corners and shout the gospel, or we're going to just have radio or TV stations and broadcast the word of God. You can't do that. Jesus is incarnational. Yes, he preached, but he came down to earth. He was born in a stable. He lived in an ordinary family. And the other night when we were having a Community Plus, one of the members of the church who was there said, you know, it's interesting that Jesus spent 30 years of his life out of the public limelight. We don't know what he did for 30 years. It's only 3 years of his life. It's only 1/11 of his life that he was in public ministry. But the other 30 years, he wasn't. He was just going about ordinary business, working, being a person amongst the community like all of us, you know. Incarnational. God comes and lives in our situation and gets involved in our situation. And out of that, Jesus spoke. Out of that, Jesus preached. Jesus preached and he did, you know. And the church must always be like that. And so if the council outsources its responsibilities and whatever, if other people do, the church can never do that. We're called to be salt and light, a witness in the world. I remember many years ago being in a place and living in an area where almost couldn't find Christians. And people would often get discouraged, and I said to them, but Guy, just being here makes a difference. Just being here makes a difference. You might not see it, you might not see that, but what would it be like if God hadn't put you there? And friends, we saw what it could be, what might have been like if God hadn't put his people in places that were strategic to help those in need. The nature of the church, God called me when I was 18 to full-time ministry, but it wasn't time for me to do anything at that point. Finally, at the age of 34, it seemed to be the right time to do something, and I said, okay. I said, I'm not going to give up what we have. I'm not going to take my family out of quite a comfortable, nice situation to just go and sit in a cosy place somewhere and run services in some nice country ideal. I said, I want to be, God, in the front line. Otherwise, I'm doing more where I am. I want to make a difference. And so, after doing 3 years at Theological College, he took us to what was then the hard drug capital of Europe, Glasgow, where we were seeing something like 120 or 30 deaths a year just from drugs and hard drugs, before bringing us back down to London some years later. Along the way of all this, and I've grown up in a Pentecostal and an evangelical church background, got other experiences as well added to that. But along the way, my views of what constituted success for a church or success in ministry were shaped by what particular things that I saw happen in Glasgow. A big congregation with lots of stuff happening, lots of programs, was not the goal anymore, as many see it to be. But instead, to see lives changed and to see communities transformed. And I believe God does that. And do you know how he does transforms communities? By transforming lives. One life at a time that then makes a difference. I spoke to you a few weeks ago about my visit to Glasgow recently to Stuart, who was one drug addict that God took out of there 20 years ago, changed his life, and for the last 6 years has been minister of a church that he and his family started right back in the area where he lived. And it's a growing church, and they're reaching people, and they're changing the community because of changed lives. And that's what God replicates all across. Jesus knew what people needed. A shepherd, one who cares for them, not one who needs them to feel good about himself, that, the shepherd's got to feel good about themselves. He wasn't interested in building the largest possible following. We've said that and shown you that already in John's Gospel, that a lot of people turned back when Jesus started saying, well, actually, this is what it really means. And we've seen some of that as a church in this last 6 months or so. So we've been very clear what the message is and very clear what we're about, perhaps even clearer than we've ever been in the past. Some people are it's not their what they want as a church. Well, this is what we think is biblical. It's what we think God calls us to be and to do. He wasn't interested in building the largest possible following. The kingdom of God will advance, but not just by promotion and not just by self-interest and not by commercialisation and all the gadgets. Hey, I've just got a bit of a business brain and I've got a background in my early years in sales. But I tell you what, I try to avoid those things as much as possible in the church because it's he that's building the church, not us. Jesus didn't fleece his sheep. He cared for them. He looked after them. He met them. One of the people I met when I was up in Scotland, in Glasgow for 7 years, and I just met him a few times, made a great impact in the few times I met him. His name was Bob Holman, now deceased. He's a writer, an academic. So I'm sure I've got a book of his, Children and Crime, still in my bookshelves. A writer, an academic, a community champion, and an activist. And his Christian faith underlined everything he was and everything he did. And he lived in that same place, Easter House, a place where you would struggle to find any professional people living. People told him all the time, Bob, what are you doing living there? You should live in a nicer part of the city. But Bob wanted to stay in the community to make a difference. And he was a champion for so much of the community and so much was going on. He fought for ordinary people at Easter House. And he fought for their right to help shape their own community and to not just impose, what the all-powerful thought was good for them. And that's some of the things that we've seen. That's where some of the anger, comes in North Kensington, when people feel that others have made decisions for them. Others have decided what's good for them because, well, they're just poor and they can't make decisions, but we have made decisions about what kind of area should be like, what kind of housing they should have, what should happen. And all those years ago, back in the 90s, Bob Holman was fighting to say, no, you need to just not come and regenerate this area and say, look what we've done for you. You need to engage the people. Jesus engaged the people. Jesus met with the people. It wasn't just a benevolent, father figure who says, oh, I've just done this for you. You should be thankful. He met with them. And that's what Jesus does with us. It's what he does in our lives. He engages with our lives and says, come on, I want to work with you. I want to change your life. I want you to be the best that you can be from what I created you to be. I want you to fulfill the purpose for your lives, and I want to do that with you. And if we stretch that to communities, that's what he wants to do. And Bob was trying to say to people and not just impose what was good for them. I know one former leader of the Conservative Party was hugely influenced by visiting Bob Holman. And yet when the time came where they were re-elected to power, he abandoned the ideas, and I know he fell out with him, and they'd become friends. Because the ideas of social justice that he'd picked up along the way suddenly became a way to save money and to make huge cuts in services. Well, there's all these Christians do stuff cheaply and whatever, so we don't need to help. And that's what happened. Instead of seeing, here are models, which is what he originally saw, and I know because I talked with him, originally saw good models of what could be done and how if the state engaged with the local communities, engaged with a lot of Christian projects in Glasgow, whether it was drugs or whatever, who were showing more success, that could have happened. But instead it became, big society, we're showing it all that, and we'll save billions. And they fell out over it. Jesus doesn't do that. We've seen how the people, not just of local, but across the city, have helped, have come alongside. But we've also seen how the people, perhaps in Grenfell Tower and that community, and now in Camden, we've seen how people have been treated. Almost not asked what was happening, just been told what to do. Jesus engages with people, and the church is no greater than its master. And we must always engage with people. So finally, just in a few minutes, what can we learn from this miracle? This feeding of 5,000, this miraculous intervention, this taking from one boy a lunch and using it to feed a crowd. The disciples learned a lesson that a little in the hands of Jesus was more than enough. Yeah, more than enough. If you go back into the Old Testament and you look at Moses, and God gives Moses a huge task, and Moses says, I'm inadequate, I can't speak, I'm useless and whatever, what can I do? And God says, well, what's that in your hand, Moses? Well, I've got a staff. And God uses that, okay, throw it on the ground. And he uses that for miracles. It's a principle here that God says, well, what have you got? Give it to me, and I'll use it. That's what the boy did. He gave Jesus what he'd got, not what I haven't got. Well, I wish I'd got more, Jesus. Jesus, no, give me what you've got. That'll be enough. That is what I want. In fact, if you give what you've got, you give everything. Because that is everything. It's like Jesus looking at the widow and the rich people putting money into the alms boxes, and people were all looking at the rich people getting out their wallets, we take credit cards, paying for it, opening their wads of money and putting it in, and everyone's going, wow, They are really good people. They're giving so much. Let's take photographs, let's interview them. Meanwhile, Jesus notices the little woman who can barely creep up to there, who just drops 2 little coins in. And he says, she's given more than the rest. Why? Because she gave everything. So 3 things. The last days we've seen that little in the hands of Jesus can accomplish what riches and powers can't do. When the stores are all shut, Jesus still has more than enough supplies. So 3 things. 1, Jesus is the provider. Jesus provided people and places for those in need to turn up to. During this Grenfell Tower disaster, Jesus had people and places that will help and did help people. Most had probably never met the church ministers, almost certainly had never crossed the thresholds of the buildings that they walked into. But God, in his wisdom, had placed the right people ready for this calamity. I believe God provided those who would care for the people right into the community, and they provided shelter, comfort, kindness and love without wanting anything in return. The hirelings, taking Jesus' analogy about the good shepherd and those that you hire, the hirelings, which might be the authorities, were conspicuous by their absence. But the shepherds were there looking after the sheep. None of us knew this was going to happen, but I believe God did, and so has placed people ready for the situation. I'm so thankful that God did. Really thankful that God did. Often in such tragedies, the cry is, where is God? And I want to say, I can show you where God was and where God is in that community. That God did not abandon the people, but God placed people there to help people. I can say, wow, I can see the grace of God at work in the middle of this calamity. Secondly, Jesus is the provider, that Jesus' followers are called to care. Jesus looks to his followers to understand this and to understand the needs of people need to be met. And here in this story, he turns to Philip and Andrew, and the parallel story in Mark 6:37, he tells his disciples, he says, feed the people. Impossible, they say. He's saying, Jesus tells us to feed them, but what with? How? We haven't got enough money and all the shops are shut anyway, even if we did have the money, what can we do? Jesus had compassion on the large crowd, a sheep without a shepherd. So he starts to teach them. And they're there for a long time. They need to be fed. The disciples were for sending them home, weren't they? He said, well, send them off home. But Jesus said, feed them, look after them. During the last 10 days, I know many people have felt inadequate in the face of their needs. And yet our call to care is backed up by the fact that God provides all we need. We were blown over by the resources that came. And then we were blown over by the resources and thinking, what are we going to do with all these bags and bags and bags and bags and bags and bags, lorry loads of stuff? It would take us about 3 months to go through them and sort them out. We haven't got the people. It's me and Danny and 1 or 2 people from the church who are there. But God provided, and we had volunteers come that we don't know about. We spoke about this last week. Probably a good 100 volunteers come from nowhere. And they said, what do you need doing? And we said, well, we need all this opening, sorting out, labelling, putting in boxes. We'll do it. And it was done. And how did God do that? How did God provide the provision? But he does. As we care, as we use what we've got, do what we can. We open the building, we use that, what we've got, our time, whatever we've got, we did it for that. And God will sustain. So firstly, Jesus is the provider. Secondly, Jesus' followers are called to care. That is what we're called to do. And thirdly, Jesus expects us only to give what we have. When I heard what was going on Wednesday morning, and I didn't hear about it till 6 o'clock because we don't live locally, and I Changed all my plans for the day, obviously. I got ready to come right in here. As I was leaving the home on that fateful Wednesday morning, Pauline said to me, whatever we have in the bank, take it all if you need to, and buy food or whatever is needed for the people. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know the response that was going on. But hey, she said, whatever we've got, just use it. Just use it to meet whatever needs you face when you go in there. That's what Jesus calls us to do. Doesn't ask us to give what we haven't got, but he asks to come to him as we are, to give him what we have. You say, well, I don't really know this Jesus. How can I be like a follower of him? How can I be like these people? He just says, come to me as you are, and I will change you. I will shape you. I will resource you. I will bless you. Miracles can be accomplished when we come and give him what we've got. If that boy hadn't brought that food, I wonder whether we would have seen that miracle. Yeah? And that boy was part of the miracle. I thought, wow. Must have gone away thinking, wow. And you know, when God uses us as part of a miracle, we go away thinking, wow, thank you, Lord. What a privilege to be used. Even the media can't help but report it was the church, and indeed the small local churches and not the mega churches. And this borough has some of the biggest, the most advertised churches in the city. It was the small churches. The one local minister was quoted in the paper saying the failed churches that met the needs, who stood arm in arm with those in need in a time of extreme crisis.